One thing that should be clear by this point is that Theodore Roosevelt was usually willing to work with the capitalist classes. By the end of his second term, he had sued 44 trusts, still a small fraction of the trusts that existed. The next president, William Taft, sued many more trusts than that, yet Roosevelt is still the one we call the trust buster. One reason for this is that Roosevelt was great at marketing himself. He was one of the first presidents to hold regular press conferences where he answered questions from the media. This helped ensure that they would write glowing stories about him for the country to read. Much of what we learn about Roosevelt today is based upon myths about him created during his lifetime. On Valentine's Day, 1884, Roosevelt's wife and his mother died the same day. To help escape his pain, he moved out to the Great Plains and operated ranches in North Dakota. It was at this point that he spun one of the most lasting myths about himself: Teddy Roosevelt, the rugged cowboy. To be sure, he did learn many cowboy-like skills on the plains, but few real cowboys had grown up in luxury in New York City, or had the money to buy large ranches in North Dakota, or rode around the plains with pearl-handled pistols. But he did develop a healthy appreciation for the beauty of the Great Plains. When he became president, he tried to ensure that this beauty would last. Appreciation for nature was another pet cause for progressives. Many progressives had an idealized vision of rural life. They wanted to give city folk a chance to enjoy it for themselves. In 1892, a man named John Muir helped form the Sierra Club, which fought to protect the wilderness of Northern California from development. While Roosevelt appreciated places like Northern California, he had a much more practical view of things. Northern California should be protected from development not because it was beautiful, but because it was finite. The country only had so many forests and animals. Companies couldn't continue cutting down trees for lumber or mining mountains for coal. Something needed to be saved for future generations to use. As president, he gave the Department of Forestry control of millions of acres of land out west. They would create national parks out of this land, which would forbid companies from taking resources from there. The larger corporations generally supported this. They were already able to take the resources they needed from the land. Forbidding new land from being developed would lock out potential competitors from entering the marketplace. This was another lasting legacy of the progressive movement, and another example of how progressive causes succeeded when supported by big business. By the end of his second term, Roosevelt was a bona fide celebrity. A new toy, the teddy bear, was named for him. After his time in office, the artist Gutzon Borglum came up with a plan to carve Roosevelt's face into the side of the Black Hills in South Dakota, along with Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. It would become Mount Rushmore, one of the most recognizable American monuments. What better tribute could Roosevelt have than to have his image carved over the wilderness he did so much to save? But Mount Rushmore covers more than it reveals. The Black Hills is sacred to the Lakota people, who had been terrorized by the American government at Little Bighorn and Wounded Knee. It continues to be one of the most neglected places in America today. And yet, here are the faces of 4 leaders who led the country that terrorized them, looking out from their sacred hills. The United States might see Mount Rushmore as a monument, but to many Lakota, it is an insult, a reminder of the genocide of the Native American people. It is an appropriate tribute to a president so fond of myth. As a student of history, Roosevelt was familiar with America's myths, including the ones spun by historian Frederick Jackson Turner in 1893. Turner claimed that Americans learned democracy and equality on the western frontier. They had to continually push west throughout their history, forcing them to come up with new solutions to tame the wilderness. Kings and nobles of Europe had no power out here. The only thing that mattered was how resourceful Americans could be. Manifest destiny made America strong. What did the future hold now that the U.S. so thoroughly achieved it? Turner's frontier thesis was accepted as truth in its day, but historians today by and large don't buy it. Americans didn't achieve manifest destiny through equality and ingenuity. They used military, government, and corporate power to conquer the West, massacring natives and Mexicans who stood in their way and forcing enslaved people to work for them. The frontier wasn't so much a laboratory for American democracy as it was American imperialism. Theodore Roosevelt was very much a man of his time period and social class. Turner's frontier thesis was accepted truth among people like him. Progressive values of hard work and honesty were accepted truth. He also accepted the scientific orthodoxy of his day, which classified human beings into racial categories. At the bottom were the people of African and Native American descent. At the top were old stock Teutonic people from Northern Europe, people like him and most progressives. In the middle were the hordes of Irish, Italian, and Jewish immigrants flooding the country. In many ways, Roosevelt was much more scared of these other races than he ever was of the capitalist class. If he hated the capitalist class, it was because they made life impossible for everyone else. They tempted the lesser races to embrace dangerous ideas of socialism and communism. Violent revolution would be inevitable if something didn't change. By making peaceful revolution impossible, they were making violent revolution inevitable. That's why the system needed to be reformed just enough to keep the genie of socialism in its bottle. Progressives largely accepted Jim Crow's segregation in the South. They largely accepted the de facto segregation of the North that consigned different races and ethnic groups to different parts of cities. These things kept the peace and allowed progressives to focus on reforming other parts of the system. The progressive movement didn't end with President Roosevelt. In many ways, he was just the beginning. The two presidents immediately after him, the Republican William Taft and the Democrat Woodrow Wilson, carried out progressive reforms of their own. Some of them went way beyond what Roosevelt did. Progressivism cut across party lines. Progressive ideas seeped into every nook of political discourse. Even today, politicians of both parties have to at least pay lip service to some progressive ideas. But Roosevelt brought progressive ideas into the mainstream. He was a noble reformer, an American hero, a practical politician, a spinner of myths, a self-promoter, a bigot, a racist, and much more besides. What we think about him and the progressive movement says as much about ourselves as it says about them.